Harris? Because a lot of members of Congress on Capitol Hill are skeptical about that. There's a lot of talk saying clearly he didn't have the same protection, because if he did, the golf course would have been secure in West Palm Beach. Can you tell people what's going on with that?
So with respect to West Palm Beach, what I can tell you without getting into our TTPs, our techniques, our tactics, our procedures, what I can tell you is that on that day, there were counter-sniper elements that were present with the former president on the golf course in proximity. There was an entire counter-assault team that was there in proximity. There was also a jump team in proximity. The advance agent who was part of the first element, whose goal was to sweep ahead, did his job. That young man is a very young agent early in his career. His vigilance, his reaction is exactly how we trained and exactly what we want our personnel to do. He identified a threat, an individual with a long gun, and he made swift decisions and took a swift action to be able to mitigate that. No shot was fired at the former president. The former president was not exposed to where he was on the golf course. And what I've said, and I said this Monday, that the procedures work, the redundancies work, so that high level of protection is working.
CBS.
Acting Director, thank you very much for doing this. Two questions, just one on West Palm Beach. The busy public road that is adjacent to that sixth hole where the suspect was hiding is a well-known blind spot on that specific golf course. Why did no one within the U.S. Secret Service sweep behind that fence line for threats?
They were sweeping ahead, Nicole. So what I just explained is that that lead element was going ahead sweeping.
But was there anyone behind the fence where the road was sweeping there to see if anyone was in the bushes?
Having been there and seen the vantage point, whether they were on the public side or the private side, the bottom line is the individual was detected.
On Butler, you testified before Congress that all assets requested for the Butler rally by Trump's detail were approved. But there are Secret Service assets that may have prevented the tragedy on July 13th, most notably a counter-assault advance team that would have surveyed the site ahead of time or enhanced counter-drone protection that might have prevented the tragedy. Were those specific assets requested by Trump's detail? If they were they denied? And if they weren't, why weren't they requested?
So the counter-assault team had an element that was there that had embedded with local law enforcement, so we had tactical elements in place. The counter-assault team leader that day had been in direct contact in the days leading up to July 13th with those tactical elements.
But just to be clear, did the Trump detail ask for any additional resources that were denied by the Secret Service?
So based on the information I have right now, the asset request, all of those assets that were asked for were approved. And so what we're looking at now is, were there any additional ones that came in through other channels? But what I can tell you, based on the information I have now, the assets were approved.
We'll go to Holmes or CNN.
Two questions. When we're talking about Florida and the idea that this was the Secret Service working as it should, does this mean that no security will change for Trump when he goes golfing again?
Well, I think what we try to do, Holmes, after every incident, we look at it. What could we have done better? We look at everything. And it doesn't matter whether there's a critical incident that occurs. So we are looking and we're reevaluating to look at, do we need? I've had conversations with Sheriff Bradshaw in Palm Beach County. And so I will leave it to the local field office to carry on those conversations about making changes. That's where I'll leave that.
And then on Butler, if we can drill down on the specific timeline a little bit, at 6:08, we know that a local radio call went out that a man was on the roof. Now, my understanding is that the state police were in a separate area with locals, and their job was to communicate any local chatter to the Secret Service. Why was that 6:08 radio call not communicated to Secret Service, or was it by the state police?
So the information I have is that we had a member of the Pennsylvania State Police in our security room, and that's what spurs that phone call to the counter-sniper response agent at 1810.
And so the state police never communicated a local radio call at 6:08 to the Secret Service?
What I'm saying is that the personnel that was in the security room passed that information, and that triggers the 1810 phone call.
Okay.
We'll go to Rebecca Beach with the Hill.
Hi, I know Congress has sounded a little resistant lately in terms of what it might do for funding for the Secret Service. Given the sort of paradigm shift that you've laid out today, I'm curious what you'll be looking for from Congress and sort of what you're seeking from lawmakers to carry that out.
We've been briefing, we've been providing information. Right now, I do think that, the Congress has questions. We're responding to those questions and providing them information. But at the end of the day, I think everybody wants a strong Secret Service, and that's what I'm working towards. That's what members are working towards, and so we'll continue to have those conversations.
We'll go to Claudia with Univision.
Hi, thank you so much for doing this. Republicans in Congress, they want the same level of security than the president for the candidates. How realistic is really that? Can you be more specific on that? I know you answered that question, but can a candidate have the same level of security of a sitting president? And also, what changes are we expecting in the security area after, where most of the incidents happened?
So how I approach that, Claudia, is this. The way the Secret Service is structured, the President of the United States has the highest level of protection of any world leader, period, the end. The number of assets that the Secret Service provides and the Department of Defense provides is at the highest levels. Those same highest levels with respect to the Secret Service are being provided to the former president's detail. And so when it comes to maintaining this, where we are at right now is we have finite resources. The way we are structured with some of our classified assets, with some of our personnel, and with some of the president, we've now expanded that to include the former president. And so while we can do this, it is certainly, we are burning through a lot of assets and resources. And that's the argument that we've been trying to show. This isn't some pie in the sky trying to say, hey, we want this now. We are not capitalizing on a crisis. We are showing the math. We have finite resources, and we are stretching those resources to their maximum right now, which is going to require us to replace these assets. It's going to require us to also adjust, to look at this and evaluate that if we have to do this again, or do it because of some other situation that we have no other control of, we have to be able to sustain that for an indefinite period of time. And so I am hopeful, and I am certainly engaged in these discussions, and I feel like at the end we will get there because we have no other choice.
What changes are you going to make outside of the secure area? That zone where everything happens?
The outer perimeter. So
Yeah.
I think that's where we have to be very direct and clear with our state and local partners as to what we're asking of them.
Go to Joe Khalil with News Nation.
Thank you, Acting Director. I've got two questions. The first, it's our understanding it takes anywhere from 4 to 10 years for an agent to go through the training that rises them up to a presidential detail level. You've described a manpower issue. Given that, do you think that training timeframe might change so you can expedite getting more officers to a presidential detail should you need that?
So we're not going to drop standards, Joe. We have not dropped standards. You do need to develop those agents. And when agents start, you cannot put them on the highest level protection, protecting a protectee. When they graduate from our training facility, they go to a field. They do advances. They do criminal investigations. The importance of having that what we call phase one, that's where those agents that are doing federal investigations, that are interfacing with local law enforcement, those are skills that they learn, analytic skills, how to conduct a federal investigation, how to interact with a U.S. attorney, how to interact with a state or local agency. And all the while they're doing that, they're also popping in and out doing protection, whether they're doing it in New York City for a United Nations General Assembly, or they're doing in advance for a visiting head of state or a world leader that comes into their field office district. That's where they cultivate and sharpen those skills, and it will take them up until probably 4 years. Ideally, that sweet spot is between the 4th and 5th year where we send them off to a permanent detail. That's where we are getting to as far as the career path. And so it's critically important that we make sure that we still develop people. being on the Presidential Protective Division or the Vice Presidential Detail, it is a very, very high-pressure situation. It requires a lot of maturity. It requires decision-making, analytic skills, and the ability to problem solve. And it takes time to develop those skills, even though we've put you through training. The more seasoning you have in the field, the better off you're going to be as far as being a protection agent.
So then how do you address the manpower issue quickly?
So right now we've had robust hiring this year. But by the time we close out the fiscal year, we're going to hire more than 400 special agents this year. Right now, looks like we're going to have a net gain in the hundreds, triple-digit net gains, something that we have not seen in a little while. I can tell you that applications right now are at an all-time high for applicants seeking employment with the United States Secret Service. So I do believe that we are going to meet this. We have no choice. We have the 2028 Summer Olympics ahead of us in Los Angeles. The Secret Service will be responsible for the security planning of that. That is going to require a tremendous amount of personnel, tremendous amount of resources, and a tremendous amount of collaboration with state and local and other federal partners. We are going to get there. We are getting there now. We have filled all of our training classes going into this next fiscal year. So we're getting there. We have turned the corner. We're showing those metrics to Congress, and I think that's the question that they've had, and we are going to show them that we can deliver on this.
And just second question is, former President Trump has said that he is going to the Alabama-Georgia football game this weekend. Are those kinds of events particularly concerning, given he could be around tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people?
So I'm not going to comment on protectee schedules. What I'll tell you is that each event is complex and each advance is different. And those advanced teams, they know what they have to do to make a secure environment for our protectees.
Toby with EWTN.
Thank you for doing this. You said we were now moving into the accountability phase of this Butler investigation. You did not want to discuss names of who might be punished, so to speak, but can you give us more detail, at least maybe how many people would face punishment or repercussions for what happened in Butler, at what levels of the organization those people represent, and what level of punishment, again, they may face?
So again, I can't comment on this. This is a personnel matter that is still pending. What I will tell you is that I have not asked for anybody to retire. That was not, I know some of that was reported. That is false. And with respect to the disciplinary process, it will be handled in accordance with our table of penalties. That will be led by the Office of Integrity in coordination with our Office of Professional Responsibility.
And then one follow-up as well. All this talk about making things more robust, more agents in the field, this type of thing, this is not the first presidential election you guys have had to secure. So why weren't all those moves put in place prior to this year's election?
So the former president has had robust security around him since he left office, more robust than prior former presidents.
Jackson Richmond.
Thank you, Acting Director Rowe. Jackson Richmond, Epoch Times. Has security been adjusted or increased following the Florida attempted assassination attempt? After all, according to Congressman Matt Gaetz, a DHS official has warned that there are 5 assassination teams targeting former President Trump. The official warned that there isn't enough protection to deal with that level of threat. Are you aware of this assessment, and what is the Secret Service doing to respond?
So I will tell you, as I mentioned earlier, we, of course, are evaluating coming out of West Palm Beach, and we're having those conversations with state and locals. I'm not going to talk about unnamed sourcing or the report you mentioned. I'm not familiar with that.
And local law enforcement doesn't have the same training that Secret Service agents do. Will the Secret Service be training local law enforcement ahead of events as to prevent another Butler?
So right now we're actually having some very good discussions with the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center about developing a curriculum to assist our state and local partners. And you know what I'll say is some of the things that we've been talking about. Our state and local partners, and I know people have said they're not trained like the Secret Service. Men and women of law enforcement protect their communities every day. They understand how to handle a crisis situation. They understand how to respond to a violent felony in progress. They know what their jobs are. we certainly, when we ask them and enlist their assistance, we're relying on them. So I think it's important that we always try to give back to them, whether it's through training or forensic support or investigative support. And so one of the things that we're contemplating now is partnering with the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center to develop not only a law enforcement guide, but also develop a training curriculum through FLETC with a cadre of Secret Service personnel to be able to train them in the principles of advance. And that will only help them when dignitaries come to their district, or perhaps if they're protecting a mayor or a locally elected official. So we're all about giving back to them. Next month, we're going to unveil a guide on how to come up with a multidisciplinary threat assessment team that's going to be led by our National Threat Assessment Center. So we are very, very in tune with what our state and local partners, how they support us, and we are constantly evaluating what we can do to not only bolster those relationships, but give back to them.
Thank you.
Sadie Gurman, Wall Street Journal.
Wow, you guys have covered a lot of ground with your questions. I guess I would just ask, guys, I don't know. You guys have really covered it. I'm sorry. I'm gonna give my question to someone else.
You only get one.
Rebecca with the Associated Press.
I'm going to go back to the line of sight issues and the roof issues. Can you just lay out very clearly who was responsible for security on those roofs? Was it the locals? What was the plan and how did it fail? And then also secondly, you keep talking about a paradigm shift, but what does that mean? Can you kind of detail what you mean by that?
So with respect to the AGR building, and that's where you're going for, right? When we construct a site, not only are we worried about who can get into a site, but also who can look into that site. So there should have been clear direction about what we needed done at the AGR building. That was discussed during the advance, but I think there was a lack of follow through based on the information I have now and what I'm seeing. There should have been better follow through in some aspects of that, about access control to that property, about access control to the collateral property of the AGR building. And so it was about not giving the state and locals clearer direction on what we needed done. With respect to the paradigm shift, this is about looking at the organization holistically. For example, the communications issue. Communications were problematic. And I think where I'm looking at is we need to have communications that are more closely aligned to the operations. And so coming out of July 13th, what I've seen and the direction I gave is we have to be very efficient with where we're putting our security rooms. Recently, I was on a visit where, again, similar to Butler, where there was a unified command post. Just as there was in Butler, there was one at this location, where not only did you have emergency services insofar as fire life safety, but you had emergency management officials. You had the highway patrol and the state police in that room. You had local law enforcement in that room. You had Secret Service agents in that room monitoring frequencies and listening to what was going on those state and local networks. In addition to that, the locals were flying a drone in proximity to the site. That drone feed was being beamed into that unified command post, and our agents had total domain awareness about what was going on. Also, they had traffic cams. They were able to pipe in those traffic cams into that unified command post. That is the model by which our field, they have taken this to heart, and those special agents in the field are now having those conversations, and they are directing exactly what we need, and they're posting our people exactly where we need to be, so that when our protectees are in a site, we have total awareness of what's going on around us, and we have total awareness of what's being communicated on those local networks.
And if I could just follow up with one question. Down in West Palm Beach, on the evening of the attempted assassination down there, the local chief, I believe it was Bradshaw, had said that when Trump was president, there would have been a lot more security around the perimeter, but basically now the Secret Service does the best that they can. But you've said that he has got the highest levels of security now. I mean, can you compare and contrast, is it the same now as he would have been getting while he was sitting president?
So what I'll say is the former president has the highest levels of Secret Service protection, and I think the sheriff actually went back and clarified his statement, so I would point you to that. I believe he did that on Monday.
Thank you, Director. Wanted to ask about Sunday's incident as well. Is it your view, I know you've talked about the procedures working as intended, is it your view that there wasn't any type of security lapse that allowed that armed individual to get within a few hundred yards of the former president?
Well, I can tell you is we're looking at it from an after-action report, looking at reviewing that. But what I think it goes to show is that that's why we have tripwires. That's why we have systems out there. That's why we have redundancies built into our protective model. And that's what was demonstrated on Sunday.
And in terms of the report, I mean, what specifically will be different on the ground now? For instance, are you mandating that command posts have both Secret Service and local law enforcement in them? Will law enforcement have to communicate on the same frequencies? Are there any sort of practical changes that you've made that are in effect, based on the report?
Yeah, so security room location, right, being where local law enforcement is, right? The broad use of technical security assets, ballistic glass, leveraging partnerships with the Department of Defense to be able to move materials, move personnel across the country in support of a nominee. So those are things that we've been doing post July 14th, and those are things that are going to probably be in existence in perpetuity moving forward.
I had also had a question about Florida. Can you say whether there's any indication that this suspect might have surveilled golf courses any time before Sunday, or what led him to choose that day to be there for maybe 12 hours?
So it's an active investigation, so I would refer you to the FBI for that.
And can you say anything more about golf courses are sprawling open places, anything that would be publicly visible that you could say, here is how we are beefing up protection when a protectee is on a golf course?
So again, what I've said, and I'll continue to do this, and I have to be very mindful of our techniques, our tactics, and our procedures. It is probably not good to continuously not only talk about Secret Service procedures, because we're telegraphing to adversaries. We're telegraphing to people who probably would intend to do harm to our protectees. But what I will tell you is that our model, our protective model, consists of multiple layers and redundancies. The outer, the middle, the inner, those are the layers. And then we have redundancies built into that. And so with respect to golf courses or any open venue, we apply those methodologies.
Ellen Gilmer with Bloomberg will be next.
Thanks, Acting Director. With regard to your conversations on Capitol Hill, can you talk about, for resources, do you need to have a specific dollar amount included in an upcoming CR to make things work, or would the anomaly language that the administration had previously requested, is that something you can live with?
I'm not going to get into specifics because we're having those conversations, and out of respect for the confidentiality of those discussions, I'm not going to disclose a number. What I'll tell you is that we've made several presentations. We're working at the staff level, and we're having those conversations, and they are ongoing.
And related to that, you mentioned earlier you want the Secret Service to wean itself from relying on other components of DHS in its protective mission. Is that contingent on getting those additional resources, either right now or at some point in the appropriations process?
Well, I don't want to rule out that we'll never have to enlist the assistance of others through requests for assistance, and we do those memorandums. And we did that back for several presidential campaign cycles. But I think the importance here is we have to be able to, at a moment's notice, surge people to where they need to go. And if we're going to be having to mitigate, and that's what we do. We're in the risk mitigation business. We are not in the risk elimination business. And so we have to be able to have the personnel, the assets, and be able to spread those out for an indefinite period of time in the event that another situation, a geopolitical conflict, or some other tension requires us to do so.
Ashley with the Examiner.
Thank you. You've addressed the golf course incident in great detail, but I just want to ask, are you fully satisfied with the way the Secret Service managed the Florida incident on the golf course, or would you change anything? Can you answer the question that way?
I'd say based on the information I have right now, I say that that situation was managed according to our training. As soon as our agent discovered the individual, took swift action and took steps to neutralize that threat. Immediately upon doing so, he communicated over the radio. There was a communication of shots fired, which immediately, not only did our personnel assigned to the close protection of the president, of the former president, hear the shots, they immediately went into action. The counter-assault team went into action. The counter-snipers went into action. Supervisors and shift personnel immediately evacuated the president, took the most expedient route to where he needed to shelter in place. He had ballistic protection around him. They sheltered in place until they could determine, was this just the first wave of an attack? Immediately, local law enforcement assets responded to the scene. Local tactical assets that were partnered with our counter-assault team were also present, immediately responded. And so that barrier, those layers of protection, those redundancies, the redundancy was the agent that first discovered, followed by another set of agents that also set up that middle perimeter around the shift that was evacuating. And so in the case of West Palm Beach, based on the information I have now, and again, we will review it, it appears that those agents, those supervisors, made swift decisions and made correct decisions.
Thank you. Hi, Acting Director. I want to drill down on this issue of resources. You sent a letter to Senator Murphy and to Senator Britt on September 5th, and it became public. And it said in the letter, you wrote, "We do not believe that the security failures of July 13th, 2024 was the result of a lack of resources." I'm hearing you talk over and over again, and it says here at the bottom of this press release you guys have today, the agency must increase its protective footprint, including personnel, technical assets, and equipment. How do you square those two things? How do you ask Congress for more money when you yourself have determined that what happened on July 13th was not a lack of resources?
So how I square that is as follows. Following July 13th, we immediately took steps to elevate the vice president, the former president, to the highest levels of Secret Service protection. We also took steps to elevate the protection of Senator Vance and eventually Governor Walz to high levels of Secret Service protection. And what I was talking about earlier is the way we are structured, and I go back to this, the President of the United States is the most highly protected individual on the face of the world. That is how the Secret Service is built. That is what we are primarily focused on. And then once you have those assets and resources, they are also committed to the vice president. So how I square this is as follows. Following July 13th, when now we are because of this hyperdynamic threat and the operational environment which we find ourselves in, we only have so much of those assets to go around. And so while we are providing them to the former president, we are providing them to the president, to the vice president, to other protectees. And so at this point, what I'm telling Congress is we can do this and we will do this, but there has to be a replacement. There has to be life cycle replacement on this. There has to be, if we're going to be called upon to do this again or do this now, because the threat is not waning. The threat is not going to evaporate anytime soon. And so we have to be prepared for this. And that is the argument that we have been making, and we have certainly made some inroads, and we're having these productive conversations with the Hill.
Can I just ask you also, will the Secret Service have the resources to protect the Capitol on January 6th? I know that's now been designated. The agency will be leading the protective services detail for that day. You're describing protecting all these different people right now. How will January 6th play out?
So the January 6th proceedings were designated a national special security event. We are the lead security planner for that. But again, we have great partnerships with all the law enforcement agencies in Washington, D.C., and most notably the U.S. Capitol Police, which are our partners when we do the State of the Union or when we do any event at the Capitol that rises to a national special security event, like the State of the Union or state funeral.
So you feel confident you will have the personnel, technical assets, and equipment you need for that day?
We will have what we need.
Director, last question is going to go to the pool.
do you think that by Congress legislating the protective detail regulations, do you think that is helpful in terms of being able to staff up or staff down the agency when you need?
So I have not done an analysis of the legislation. I assume it's pretty direct. But look, as I stated, I'm sure Congress wants to make sure that the Secret Service is strong. I don't know the intentions behind this piece of legislation, but what I'll just point back to, coming out of Butler, coming out of July 13th, we've been providing the highest levels of Secret Service protection to the former president.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone.